Hello and welcome to Green Building Bites presented by Green Building Alliance. I'm Leslie Montgomery with the Green Building Alliance team, and in today's bite, we bring you an interview with Gerrod Winston. Gerrod is owner of Winston Design and Development. He's a licensed architect with over 20 years of experience with successful architecture firms. He's a LEED accredited professional and a certified passive house consultant. Gerrod has been active with several organizations, and he has a deep interest in environmentally conscious design, mentoring young people of color, and community well-being. In addition to his past role as president of Pittsburgh's NOMA chapter, he also was active in the Sustainable Construction Committee at Habitat for Humanity of Greater Pittsburgh. Gerrod is past president of the Young Preservationists Association and a former board member of the Wilkinsburg Development Corporation. Finally, he also serves as an adjunct faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University's School of Architecture. In today's interview, I want to ask Gerrod about his journey as an architect and also his transition to not only designer, but also developer. Please help me welcome Gerrod. Hello, Gerrod. How are you?
Hey, Leslie. Doing well. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you for talking with me today. So why don't you start by telling me what appealed to you about design and architecture originally when you decided to pursue that career path?
Oh, you're asking me to go way back in time. But so I think when I really seriously started to consider being an architect was actually in high school, my junior year. And what appealed to me is, initially I was very much a graphic artist, more of the fine arts in terms of the traditional sense. And through a few classes, a drafting class and a modeling class, I realized that I really enjoyed the creation of things, just in a general sense. And through that drafting and modeling and art class, I really thought that architecture was like really well suited for me. Although I really at that point didn't know quite what architecture really was as a profession, but that was my first sort of serious consideration of the field.
That's great. And now you've been doing it for almost 20 years, right?
I think this is 21. Yeah,
Wow.
21 years. So
Awesome.
it's so far so good, if you want to call it that.
So good. That's right. Well, so that's really interesting to hear. I love hearing that story about what got you into architecture. Now, can you tell me what interested you about then also taking on development?
Yeah, so after, it wasn't quite 20 years, but I would say 15 years into the profession, I think, through numerous projects and working with a number of firms, it became apparent that I really enjoyed creating projects as opposed to, the typical, I think firm structure is such that, you're given projects and clients approach firms. And so the idea, the impetus of projects are already sort of a given. And your job as a professional is to execute them or bring someone else's vision to fruition. So what I started to think was I would really probably like creating projects for myself.
Gerrod, what are some values or goals or priorities of your own that you have been able to incorporate into your work now or that you would like to incorporate in the future?
Okay. Well, so good question. I think there are a few points that I wanted to integrate into the business from, my plan, at the very early stages. And I think those things were sustainability, equity, working within, the underserved communities of Pittsburgh. And then finally, I think just creating projects that I enjoy working on. So I think those are the few sort of like pieces of the puzzle that I try to integrate on, throughout all the projects I work on.
If you were to offer advice to someone who is in the same place you were a few years ago, what would you tell them about this journey that you've been on, and what advice would you give them?
I would say a few things. One, come into it with a very detailed plan, although nothing typically goes as planned. The more you've thought out, the more that you've looked into, strategies for the company, what your market focus will be how you're going to access capital, initial networking. A lot of the things that I found are similarities between architecture and development, tied to, your network. So contractors, other architects, engineers, like all the people that you need within your circle, are very similar on both sides. So, keying in on your network, and also being realistic about your approach to the business, the scale of it, what types of projects you want to work on, is it actually feasible for your, the amount of resources you have available to you. All these things are, I think, important to sort of lay out in a very, detailed plan before you make any of these moves. I think the second thing I would say is, I think this is true of any transition professionally. What are your tipping points, or what are your thresholds for pain? So you're making a dramatic move from one profession to another.
So Gerrod, my last question for you is, you had mentioned the fact that you really value that alignment of sustainability and equity and community engagement. And so I'd love to hear from you. Is there a green building project anywhere that you would point to that you think meets all of those goals?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in terms of local projects, I think there are a lot of good examples that check off some of the boxes, meaning, highly sustainable, and, good example projects that are well designed. In terms of what aligns better with what I intend to do or what I'm trying to do now, I would have to look at an example like, the Onion Flats. They're a developer out of Philadelphia, and they're focused on, high efficiency, low energy, sustainable projects. They're doing a lot of affordable housing. They've been doing it for years. They kind of have it down to not wouldn't call it a science, but they do have their system. But I would say, in terms of projects specifically, there's a few in Philadelphia I think I would look at as a model, and hopefully like bring that to the Pittsburgh market.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Gerrod. I really appreciate you talking with me today. I loved getting some perspective from you and even some advice for others in terms of your experiences as both designer and developer. So thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. It's always good to talk to you.
You too.